working with us ever since their oldest was a toddler, and they come in and help us out with all kinds of things. And right now you can see on the left side that they are helping us out with our plant sale, putting plant tags in those plants so that they can get shipped out to people locally or picked up on site. We're having a no contact pickup on site at Monarch Watch. So Dr. Chip Taylor is the founder of Monarch Watch. He founded Monarch Watch in 1992, and you may recognize his picture. He's kind of a iconic monarch guy. He has assumed the role of the Eastern tagging program. Now, that tagging program began with Monarch Watch in 1992, but prior to that, his predecessor, Dr. Fred Urquhart from Canada, had a tagging program that was one of the first citizen science programs in the United States. And he began tagging in 1940. And this photograph was from the National Geographic magazine. They followed him up into the mountains. And on that day, he actually found the first tagged monarch that was tagged in Minnesota and found in Mexico. And you can see the little tag right here. I'm circling it with my mouse pointer. He found it as they were sitting there photographing him in the mountains. And it was kind of a very strange coincidence that he found the first tag as they were sitting there watching him. So we have our tagging program that we run, and it covers the eastern United States, and we do this program during the fall migration. You can see our tag is quite different. It's circular as opposed to round, and it's also on the hind wing, on the underside of the wing. He was putting them on the forewing and the leading edge of the forewing. We found that is it's much more aerodynamic to put them in the position that we have them now. And they're also slippery and let that air just flow right over them. A lot of people of many ages can participate in our program, and it is a really great way to get people connected to an insect. Insects are often overlooked as conservation initiatives are concerned, and we really think that it's a great species for people to connect to, because it's almost always a positive experience. So, as you may know, there's a major flyway of monarchs that monarchs travel in the United States and on two major pathways. The eastern migration is what we focus on for the most part. And those butterflies that are part of the eastern migration are right now coming up into this area right here. So people I'm sorry, I just advanced my slide accidentally. People in Kansas are starting to see monarchs come up and lay eggs on milkweed, and you can follow that pathway, and you can also report monarch sightings on a website called Journey North, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The main breeding area for monarchs in the summertime is the Corn Belt. We also see a lot of monarch activity along the coastline on the East Coast. And you can see there's also a population of monarchs that overwinter in the tip of Florida. And then there's a separate migratory pathway on the West Coast. I will not be addressing that today. I'm not a Western expert, so I will just be talking about the Eastern migration. This is an example of one of the tag recoveries. So the tag was placed on the monarch and Linda Code, actually, we have her name, placed it on the monarch in Ontario, Canada on September 17th in 2015. And that butterfly was later found alive and photographed by Martin on October 31st. And he reported that tag to us. So it's telling us a lot about where that butterfly traveled, how far it traveled, and how long it took it to get there. And we can ascertain a lot of information about butterflies, the monarch butterfly's pathway, resource allocation, and all kinds of other things when studying this, the results of this tagging program. This is what an aerial view of the monarch sanctuary would look like. Dr. Lincoln Brower, who is now passed on, took this photograph. He would fly over the monarch sanctuaries and photograph the areas of coverage. Now, all of the information that we have about monarch populations in Mexico on an annual basis come from these aerial photographs. They're based on the area that is covered by monarchs, and you can see all of this area through here that has orange, what looks like orange leaves are actually monarch butterflies in the trees. And those estimates of population result in these graphs that we have. And as you can see, the most recent population dipped down from last year. We're seeing a lot of fluctuation. It's normal for insect populations to have high fluctuation rates, just because of the nature of their reproductive strategies, and insects are just kind of a boom and bust sort of organism. So we're hoping that we can start seeing the numbers increase by increasing habitat and decreasing the threats to monarchs. So here are a few things about monarchs that I want to cover so that you understand kind of some of the aspects of their biology. Monarchs are only able to eat milkweed when they are caterpillars. And the female monarchs will find that milkweed by smelling it with their antenna, and they can also taste with their feet. They have sensors on their feet. They obtain toxins from the food that they're eating, and they retain that toxic quality throughout their life. So a lot of other butterflies have adapted to mimic toxic butterflies, including monarchs and other toxic butterflies that I might have time to show you at the end of this talk. So the butterflies have these toxins in their tissues, and when a bird eats a monarch butterfly, there is an immediate response. And the hope for the species is that the bird will remember what the butterfly looked like. And so monarchs use that bright orange and black coloration to warn anything that eats it that if they are going to eat me, this might be what happens. And so this is also a photograph by Dr. Lincoln Brower, who was studying the reaction of birds consuming monarchs. And this is an iconic image that used to be in a lot of textbooks across the country. And that bird is vomiting. So the idea is not to kill the predator, but to actually cause it to have a reaction so that it won't eat any more of that particular species. Monarchs are either migratory or reproductive. So the butterflies that are on their migratory pathway on the southern route are non-reproductive. If they start becoming reproductive, then they will not have enough energy to make it all the way to Mexico and also overwinter and come back up the next spring. So those butterflies that live in Mexico during the wintertime have a 6 to 8 month lifespan, compared to the reproductive monarchs that have a 2 to 6 week lifespan. So it really shortens their life, increases their metabolism, and causes them to use up a lot more energy, which decreases their lifespan. So monarchs are tropical. They can't survive a winter. Here we have a photograph that was taken in Sierra Chincua and on March 11th, 2016, when we had a big snowstorm in Mexico that killed a lot of the monarchs that were just getting ready to migrate north. Monarchs need nectar sources. So if you are planning a garden to create habitat for monarchs, don't just think about milkweed. You need to think about a lot of the other things that monarchs need, including shelter and other food sources for the adult butterflies. If you stagger those bloom times, you'll be providing resources throughout the entire season that you have monarchs and other pollinators in your garden. This particular plant that is on in this picture is an aster. Asters are host plants for another species. I believe it's the, I'll have a picture of it later. I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll get back to that. And so a lot of the plants that we're planting for monarchs are also good for other organisms, including milkweed. So here is a great resource for you. Over here on the right side of this, Monarch Joint Venture has a flyer that they created that lists a lot of the very important citizen science that's going on surrounding monarch butterflies. Anyone who is interested and has the time can participate in these various organized citizen science projects. So I'm gonna show you a few websites here. Monarch Joint Venture is where that flyer came from. And if you look here, there's a tab called Resources right here. If you click on that, you will find a whole lot of information, and all of the information on the Monarch Joint Venture website is good information. It's screened by a lot of different monarch specialists. Hold on just a moment. I'm going to mute myself for just a second. This particular slide that we have here is one of my most frequently referred to slides, and it is a question and answer about the research related to tropical milkweed on monarch and monarch parasites. If you have questions about how tropical milkweed and the parasite OE interacts with monarch butterflies, you should look at this. So this is where you might want to think about getting a pen and paper and writing down this particular website, because there's a lot of good information on that. Journey North is another organization that is really important to monarch biology and understanding their migration. They track the first sightings of monarch butterflies every year, and if you scrolled down, you would also see hummingbirds, robins, humpback whales, and a lot of other organisms that are part of a migratory pathway that they're tracking on this website. There's also, out of the University of Georgia, Project Monarch Health. Note that their website address is monarchparasites.org. They are, if you Google Project Monarch Health, you might come up with Monarch Healthcare or something like that. So just make sure you put Georgia in there and you'll find them. They are sending out free testing kits for people who want to monitor their population, the home-reared monarchs, or even, I believe, they also let you test wild monarchs for the disease OE. And then, of course, Monarch Watch has our tagging program, and we also have a place where you can go buy milkweed from us. Most places in the United States, with the exclusion of the desert Southwest and other areas where there aren't milkweed populations, we can sell milkweed to most of those areas. We also have programs for people who would like to obtain free milkweed for schools and nonprofits. That is a program that I am in charge of, and we also have one for people with larger acreage, people who have enough space to plant about 100 milkweeds or more. And those grants are one of the things that we really need help with. Right now, our funding sources are dwindling for those, and we need to start asking organizations and individuals for contributions to help us out with those programs. They're very important. And also, if you're interested in our tagging program, you can go to our shop, and you can purchase the tags there, and you can also purchase Monarch Waystation information is there. You can purchase a Monarch Waystation sign and a registration, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And this is where you could go to donate. All of the money that goes through this particular part of our website, if you donate through this, it'll go through the University of Kansas Endowment Association, and they do not take any overhead out. So we're really appreciative of them for giving 100% of those donations to our programs. Also, if you scroll down on that page, you'll see information about butterfly gardening here. This is one of the best parts of our website that's just hidden. It's a hidden gem. So if you are looking for a good plant list, you can go there and find a great plant list for your garden, and also information about migration and tagging here. So the Monarch Waystation program has been going on for about 15 years, and it is basically just a certification program for your garden. And as you can see, we have a lot of Monarch Waystations. There are also waystations in other countries. This is a photograph of the Monarch Waystation #1 on campus. And it looks like maybe Diana's helping me with some drawing on the paper, on the I don't know what's going on there. There's somebody else's drawing. So if you visited Monarch Watch in the fall, hopefully you'll be able to do that. We have all kinds of resources for butterflies in that garden, and it is maintained by the Douglas County Master Gardeners. So I'm going to talk a little bit about milkweeds. You saw in this picture, these are common milkweeds here. This is common milkweed as well. It's a favorite for a lot of different pollinating insects. So bees love it. It's actually pollinated by bees. Monarchs have those long, skinny legs and long proboscis. They try to keep up out of the sticky pollen. And the great spangled fritillary there in that picture also loves the nectar from these plants. So that's one of the potential host plants for monarchs to lay their eggs on. Also, this is swamp milkweed. Swamp milkweed is one that a lot of gardeners like to plant in their garden because it doesn't do a lot of underground, tunneling underground with its root system and popping up in unusual places. The common milkweed that I showed you just previously sometimes does that. This is a plant that's a lot easier to find in nurseries. If you're in a nursery, a lot of times they'll have a butterfly bush of a butterfly weed, sorry, not butterfly bush, butterfly weed of some sort. And if you are in the Kansas City and Missouri area, you might see some of these plants. Asclepias verticillata, top left there, is one of the most widespread plants historically in the United States as far as milkweed goes. And down here on the bottom left here, I'm showing you something that, as you notice here, it says, it does not say Asclepias. It's Synantium, and it is a potential host plant for monarch butterflies, especially in the fall when not a lot of other milkweeds are available to them. So a lot of people mistake this particular plant for bindweed, but bindweed is in the morning glory family, and this is actually in the dogbane family, which is the same family that milkweed is in. So why are monarchs declining? There are multiple reasons, but whenever you look at any major species decline in the world, most of the time you can point to habitat loss as the main reason for species decline. And it's usually because, not always, but usually because of humans overtaking their space, or some other reason for humans to remove that habitat. So this graphic that you can see over here is a map of the United States from the Nature Conservancy, and it shows the original tallgrass prairie ecosystem in the United States. And the light green areas are what is now gone. The dark green areas are what is represented in the United States that remains. So you can see where we are in Kansas is right about up here. And we're not that far from one of the largest remaining tallgrass prairie ecosystems in the United States, which is awesome for a lot of different species that rely on the tallgrass prairie ecosystem. But what's not so awesome is that you can see that the majority of that tallgrass prairie system is gone. And one of the reasons for this strip through Kansas being still there is that we have the Flint Hills region, which has a lot of large rocks in the soil. And so the plow that was invented when people came to the United States early on did not successfully plow up those areas because there was so much rock in it. So it was really, really a blessing that we were able to maintain that that strip just because there were a lot of rocks in the ground. So this is another overhead view of one of the colonies in Mexico. And you can see the massive amounts of monarch butterflies are causing this orange color in the trees. But you can also see right next door to it where we have deforested areas. And that is still an ongoing issue. But when we talk about the problems of monarch declines, we have to also take into consideration what our part of this is. And it used to be that we would always just say, oh, it's because of deforestation in Mexico, but we know now that it's really much more complicated than that. So one of the things that we've been really focusing on is the amount of glyphosate tolerant corn and soy that's being planted in the United States. Soybeans are mostly used for animal feed, and somewhat are also used for biodiesel, but for the most part, it's not a giant source of food for human beings. It used to be that if you were looking at a soybean field in the corn belt or in the areas where soy is planted, you would see milkweed plants in the fields. And as it turns out, those milkweed plants were actually very good sources of food for monarch caterpillars. You can also see back here in the background of this particular field are other milkweed plants. Now, farmers don't want these plants in their fields for a reason. They compete with the growth of their crops, and it reduces crop yields. So what we're trying to do is find other ways and places for milkweed to survive elsewhere, because we do have a high demand for these other things that our food supply depends on a lot of these things, because we're using the grains for cattle feed. It also applies to corn. Corn is mostly used for cattle feed. Also, ethanol. Ethanol is a big reason for a lot of the increased yields in the United States for corn production. So we kind of have to look and see what our role in this is. Now, glyphosate itself is being used on these crops because they can tolerate it. They've been genetically modified to tolerate glyphosate, but glyphosate doesn't kill the monarchs directly. So we want to just make sure that that's clear. Glyphosate is killing their host plants. And the increase of glyphosate since the advent of genetically modified crops is pretty drastic. So this was glyphosate use in 1992. And this is what it looked like in 2016. Now, I got these graphics from the US Geological Survey. They have pesticide maps that they put out every year in conjunction with the US Department of Agriculture. So I'm gonna just go backwards and show you that again. Maybe locate where you live and see kind of what that looks like where you live. There's also a lot of climate, there are also a lot of climate issues with monarch declines. So we're talking about unfavorable breeding conditions, unfavorable migratory weather, unfavorable overwintering weather. And with the deforestation of the forests in Mexico, we're also seeing those unfavorable weather conditions impacting the forests more because they don't have a buffer zone. So those, if you think of trees as being kind of insulating all of those changes that occur in a forest that has been has had a lot of trees removed, that insulation isn't there for them. So if we look at how we're using our energy, you and I are somewhat responsible for some of the increases in global temperatures, and some of this also goes back to the agricultural practices that we're seeing. So if we're using ethanol in our cars to drive around, and most of the global emissions that I'm responsible for because of my car, I need to start thinking about how that might impact monarch declines as well. And as soon as we start thinking about these things, we're also going to have a better understanding of how the monarch butterfly is kind of a flagship species for a lot of other things. One of the things that Dr. Taylor is often looking at when he's looking at monarch movements in the United States and Canada and Mexico are these wind maps. And you can find these wind maps. They're pretty amazing. They're usually live, and they show, they're animated, and they show what the wind is doing right now. And so that's another thing that we can use to better understand monarch migration and the patterns that they are exhibiting from year to year. One of the things that Monarch Watch is trying to do is to get people to distribute milkweed plants. So we do have those grants that I spoke about. We have nurseries in Kansas, Wisconsin, Oklahoma, California, and Florida. And as you can see, we've distributed a lot of plants to a lot of people. We're trying to get those plants out there to get people to start planting milkweed, and also encouraging people to plant all of these other nectar sources. If you are interested in helping to contribute to some of our efforts, feel free to donate to Monarch Watch. That donate button is in the top right corner of our website. This is what one of the operations looks like. This is, you can see some other plants growing back here in the background. Those look like some grasses back there, but all of this is milkweed of a particular species right here. And this particular greenhouse is in Baldwin City, Kansas. We grow hundreds of thousands of plants each year, and they are going to a lot of different places. So we're trying to distribute them widely. And I am not expecting you to read all of this, but I just hope that you'll see that there's, there's a real diverse amount of places we're sending these plants. And one of them that is my favorite is this nonprofit and school grant that I have. It's through the Natural Resources Defense Council, and each recipient gets one flat of milkweeds to put in a garden, and the kids are getting out there and they're helping to plant the plants, and they're learning about ecology, and they're getting in the sunshine, and they are interacting with monarch butterflies. Some of them are the teachers are actually creating curriculum or using existing curriculum that is out there, and they're also creating Monarch Waystations. So with this particular place in Newark, Delaware is on our Monarch Waystation map. So I've mentioned that Monarch Watch has we have our own waystation, and one of the things that we like to do is provide nectar sources for a lot of different organisms, and also food sources for a lot of different butterflies besides monarchs. So this is a list of butterflies that we have seen in our garden, and for many of them, we actually provide the host plant for them. So as monarchs like to consume milkweed as caterpillars, other butterflies have other specific host plants. And the next picture here is going to be a viceroy. Now this is one of those butterflies that mimics monarchs. If a bird has already eaten a monarch and doesn't like the way it tasted, it will also avoid the viceroy. I'm going to go back here and note that this is a male monarch. You can see that it has a little enlarged spot right here. This is a tattered old guy. This might be what a migrant from Mexico would look like in the early spring if you lived in Texas and you started seeing monarchs coming up. And it is on the swamp milkweed. So the viceroy, as you can see, has this extra line right here. And that's how you can tell the difference between those two butterflies. I'm going to go back, and then that'll be the last time we compare these two. Viceroys also don't spend a lot of time consuming nectar from flowers. They'll spend more time eating rotting fruit. We also have the silver-spotted skipper in our garden, and we have host plants for that. The painted lady, a very similar butterfly, the red admiral, and you'll notice that they also have the red and orange coloration that somewhat mimics monarch butterflies. Also, the variegated fritillary might be confused for a monarch by a bird. And the Gulf fritillary, which sometimes migrates in from the south. The pipevine swallowtail is a butterfly that has a lot of mimics as well because it eats pipevine plants, and pipevines are also poisonous. The zebra swallowtail here in this picture is laying its eggs on the bud of a pawpaw plant. We have pawpaws in our garden, and that's a native tree that provides fruit for animals as well as humans. You can eat pawpaws, but the zebra swallowtail cannot survive without pawpaw plants. A lot of people are familiar with the black swallowtails, which could be considered a mimic of the pipevine. Black swallowtails eat fennel and dill, and their caterpillars often look a lot like monarch caterpillars. The giant swallowtail oftentimes will eat things in the tulip tree, magnolia family. Tiger swallowtail. Question mark, not to be confused with the comma. Now, if you look closely at this wing, you can see there is the question mark right there. If I cover that up, that's a comma. So those are two different butterflies that have very similar appearance. The spring azure and the summer azure. The eastern tail blue is a very common butterfly in the upper Midwest. Sleepy orange. The pearl crescent is the butterfly that eats those asters that I was showing you earlier. So they like asters if you have asters in your garden. The gray hair streak. Hackberry butterflies are named for their host plant, the hackberry tree. Cabbage whites, cabbage whites are not, I don't believe, native to the United States, and they are oftentimes considered a pest. The checkered white. The cloudless sulfur is also a migrant, but it does not have such a long migratory pathway as the monarch butterfly. The buckeye consumes plantain, which is not to be confused with the tropical fruit plantain, but it's a short, leafy, broad-leafed weed that grows in people's yards. The goat's weed leafwing often is confused for a leaf. The red-spotted purple, a lot of times these are considered to be forest species. White-lined sphinx moths, they're in the same group of organisms that the tomato hornworm and the tobacco hornworm are in. Cecropia moths are very large moths. We also sometimes see the polyphemus moths. Now this is an organism that, as you can see, has the same red and black coloration as monarch butterflies. And there's a reason for that. As you can see it here, is eating a milkweed leaf. And a lot of people try to get rid of these because they think, well, we're trying to save the monarchs. We're not trying to save the tussock moths. But really, they're part of the ecosystem as well. So if you happen to get tussock moths on your plants, maybe think of one of your plants as a sacrificial milkweed and move them all over there for the tussock moths. What they will do is they'll actually skeletonize a plant. They'll eat everything except for the veins of the plant, and what you'll have left is just a lacy looking remains of the leaf. And the last one that I have here is very unexpected. This is also, its name is actually unexpected. I don't know how to pronounce that. Cycnia moth, I believe. This is on the world milkweed, which is the one that's very, very widespread in the United States. But it also isn't a typical milkweed because it has those really fine, thin leaves. But it is also, this moth is an obligate species that can only consume milkweed plants. We also have two beetles, the swamp milkweed beetle and the milkweed beetle, that are obligate milkweed consumers, and two true bugs, the large milkweed bug and the small milkweed bug, that some people try to eliminate in their gardens, but they're really actually still part of the ecosystem. And what we're trying to do here is encourage people to put up with a little bit of herbivory in their gardens. So I think with that, I am done, and I have time for questions if we have some in the chat box. So let me unshare my screen here, and I have some acknowledgements that you can read while I'm doing that. Okay. Is Diane still there?
Yes, I'm still here, and there haven't been any questions so far.
Okay. Well, I do have time for questions. So if there are any participants who would like to, one at a time, hopefully in an orderly fashion, unmute your microphone, and I'm happy to take questions.
I have a question.
Sure. Is this Carol?
Yeah, maybe somebody knows it. The monarchs that lay eggs on the way down, thus changing from migratory to reproductive, do they get to Mexico? And if so, do they have enough energy to make it through the winter?
I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that question, Carol. It is likely that they are monarchs that got the wrong triggers. Somehow they're getting triggered to move, but they're not getting triggered to not develop their reproductive organs. So those butterflies that are non-reproductive are actually juvenile butterflies. They have not yet developed the hormonal system and the reproductive system of an adult butterfly. So those butterflies that you're seeing, and you often see them laying eggs in the fall during the migration, those are probably not going to make it to Mexico, but that's really just on my part a guess, and I'm pretty sure that's accurate, just because it takes so much energy for monarch butterflies to maintain those reproductive organs. And that would pretty much zap their energy for that long haul in the winter. There was something else I was going to say about that, and maybe come to me later. But yeah, that's a really, well, yeah, what I was going to say about that, Carol, is that a lot of people get concerned when they see monarch butterflies doing something unusual, like laying eggs in the late fall, or emerging too late to be a migrant at all because it's going to freeze. The way I like to look at those particular organisms that are doing a little bit of a different thing than all of the other ones is they are kind of like an insurance policy for the monarch population. If all of the monarchs did exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, they would all be in danger if something bad happened along the way. So what we're seeing in that is a variation that will allow for maybe, possibly, some other change happening elsewhere that's beneficial for those monarchs that are doing the different thing. So that's kind of how species survive evolutionarily, is by variation in their systematic approaches to their environment. So some of them are going to be doing things that appear to be detrimental, but in fact may be a benefit to them if all of the others have a detrimental impact. Does that make sense? Okay.
There are a couple of questions in the chat now, Angie.
Sure. Let me see. So, how many monarchs are tagged every year? Last year, we mailed out over 400,000 tags. It was one of the biggest tagging mailings that we had. And early on in my presentation, I showed pictures of those kids and their family helping with stuffing envelopes. We actually stuff all of the envelopes here at Monarch Watch. And by here at Monarch Watch, I don't mean my home, but that's where I am right now. But I don't think that 400,000 butterflies were tagged, certainly, because somebody might have purchased 25 tags and then only found 1 or 2 butterflies, right? So each year, the butterflies that are tagged are recorded through tagging data sheets that people send in. So part of this is that you have to turn in your data. So it's also possible that our estimates of how many tags are being placed on monarchs is a little bit low because people aren't always turning in their data. That's another big part of this. So I am not really very good at remembering numbers. So Terry, I think, was the one who asked this question. I believe that 1% of the monarchs are recovered. That information is out on the internet if you Google it, but I cannot, for the life of me, remember numbers very well. So I don't want you to quote me on that. The 400,000, I do remember that. Because I was stuffing those envelopes myself. Okay, so what is the biggest contributor to the decline of monarchs population in the last 25 years? I would say that since people started colonizing the United States from Europe, that's actually probably when the big changes started occurring in the United States that started changing and shifting some of these organisms and the habitats that they've been needing to use. We have continued to remove habitat in the United States throughout the history of European white settlement and on to now. I think that personally, I believe that is the #1 cause for decline of any species in the United States. But going along with that, hand in hand, you also see climate change occurring. So in the ice sheets, the polar ice sheets, you can actually see where the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere changed as soon as agricultural practices started in China thousands of years ago. So you can actually see a peak in those carbon dioxide levels because of plowing of the land. Plowing of the prairie probably released tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And every time you restore a prairie back to its original state, you're starting to cause the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to go back into the ground. Prairie plants in that Great Plains region are one of the best carbon sinks that we have. A lot of people love trees. I love trees too, but trees are all above ground for the most part. Prairie plants live underground, and when you burn a forest, the forest is dead. But if you burn a prairie, it continues to grow the next year and put that carbon back into the ground from the atmosphere, creating oxygen for us to breathe. So I think those two things are very, very linked to one another. Habitat degradation in Mexico does have an impact, but monarch butterflies, even if all of the habitat in Mexico was destroyed, monarch butterflies would still have some holdouts in other parts of the world. So if you destroyed all of the milkweed, you would not have monarch butterflies. So that, I believe, is really important. Is there tracking built into the tagging? That's a really good question. There have been people who are trying to develop some kind of way to actually track monarch butterflies through some kind of radio tracking device. Unfortunately, right now, all of those devices are too heavy, and they require some level of drag on the butterfly's ability to move through the air. So the tagging program that we currently have does not include any kind of tracking. A lot of people think that once they put the tag on the butterfly, we're going to be able to figure out where that butterfly went exactly. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It would be fantastic, wouldn't it? I keep thinking that it might be really cool to find some kind of drone that could follow a butterfly around with some sort of signal on it. But I don't know. Another thing that's coming up, that's being developed, is a system for figuring out the density of the butterflies that are in the forests in Mexico, rather than just showing us the overall coverage of the area that they're in, because that doesn't tell us how many butterflies there are in that area. It just tells us how much coverage of area. So they're doing this with some special devices that were originally developed for measuring bat density in caves. So they'll go in with a laser and they'll map out the cave before the bats arrive. And then when the bats come, they go and map it out again. And as soon as they get that second map, they're able to determine the density of the bats in the cave. So they're doing something similar in Mexico and in California with that kind of technology, which I think is pretty exciting. I'm gonna get a drink. When do I anticipate the last update to this year's tagging report? I think there are just a few more tags that need to be added. I think we can expect that to be completed sometime after our spring sale is over. We're really busy with that right now. So I don't know, a lot of people don't realize there are only 4 full-time employees at Monarch Watch. It used to be just 2 for a long time. There's myself, Ann Ryan, who runs our rearing program. She's the one who takes care of the butterflies on site, which we have there all year round. She also manages the tagging program with Jim Levitt, and Jim is the longest standing Monarch Watch employee. And then I have a colleague named Dina Podreberic, and she's the one who helps us out with our restoration grant to get milkweeds out to people who have larger areas of property. And of course there's Chip, but Chip doesn't get a salary, so he's not an employee. I don't think a lot of people realize that he's just doing this out of the goodness of his heart. So are there any other questions?
Well, Angie, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. And we look forward to hearing more about monarchs in the future. So I hope everything goes well with your sale and with any donations that people want to contribute.
I hope so too. And if you didn't hear about it, we do have a sale going on right now. If you're locally from Lawrence, Kansas City, Topeka, and you can come to Lawrence, you can schedule a hands-free, a no contact pickup of plants that we're selling. We have a wide variety of nectar sources and other butterfly plants that we're selling. And thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and take care, stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.